Welcome to this edition of the Purity Post, a short video blog to help you understand and apply biblical truth regarding sexuality. My name is Jonathan Daugherty, and I'm the director of Be Broken Ministries, a national outreach whose mission is healing sexual brokenness by God's grace, one story at a time. In our last post, we looked at God's high standard for sexual conduct that He expects of His people. We saw the link between sexuality and God's holiness, that even how we manage our sexuality is meant to be a reflection of His character of purity and goodness. This is obviously not a value promoted in our culture of sex with no boundaries. But we must remember that just because society advocates promiscuity and abusive sexuality doesn't mean God changes or lowers His standards. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And because of His unchanging nature, we can have an anchor in the stormy seas of a sex-saturated society. The book of Leviticus in the Bible is filled with God's instructions to His people for how they are to live. We looked last week in chapter 18 at some of God's boundaries for sexual conduct. There are additional instructions in chapter 20. Everything from man not being sexual with his neighbor's wife, or his father's wife, or his daughter-in-law, or other men, or a mother and her daughter, or even animals. And God gives strict consequences for such sexual immorality. Death. Seems kind of harsh, doesn't it? But God is letting His people know what is right and what is wrong in His eyes. And anything that is wrong in God's eyes is sin, or missing the mark. And all sin has consequences. God then goes on and shares the consequences of committing other kinds of sexual impurity. Sexual conduct with a sister requires being cut off from the people. Sex during a woman's monthly period meant both the man and woman being removed from the people. Sex with an aunt resulted in dying childless. The same consequence for a man who takes his brother's wife. Are you getting the picture of just how high a standard God places on our sexual conduct? Purity is important to Him. And here's why. Leviticus 20:26 says, "You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine." To be called the child of God is not something to be taken lightly. God expects His people to live by the standards He has set for them. To not live according to His law is an affront to His character and goodness, as well as a detriment to our purpose and even our health. God's laws aren't only moral, they are also for our best health and enjoyment of life as He has made it to be. Sexually transmitted diseases are rampant in our society. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, since 1990, those infected with chlamydia increased over 250%, with 2.5 times more women being infected than men. Gonorrhea, though on a slight decrease since 2006, still infects over 300,000 people, with rates highest among women ages 15 to 19. Genital herpes and genital warts affect nearly 600,000 people. God's boundaries on sexuality are truly for our protection, not only in a moral sense, but also from a health standpoint. His standards for sexual conduct are ultimately for our own good. I'm perplexed when people want to toss out God's laws as antiquated and irrelevant to today's culture. I think His standards for sexuality are more relevant today than ever. Ask any doctor that treats sexually transmitted diseases the best practices for avoiding them, and then compare their answers to what God's Word says about sexual purity. Shazam! You'll discover that God isn't as out of touch as some presume Him to be. We must remember that God didn't give these instructions regarding sexuality to punish us. He loves us. He wants us to know where danger lies, like a good dad helping his children navigate through a thick jungle. Sexuality can often feel like a jungle, teeming with scary, confusing, yet exhilarating stimuli all around. We need a guide, someone to lead us to clean water, safe food, and strong shelter. God is our guide, showing us how to live, setting us apart so we can then guide others in His ways. Don't get lost or swallowed up in the jungle of sexuality. Feast on God's Word, drink in His living water, and find shelter in the shadow of His wings. When you do, you'll discover beauty and pleasure like you've never known, because you will finally be living as you were made to live, pure. Thanks for watching this edition of the Purity Post. If you'd like more resources, please visit BeBroken.com or call our toll-free number at 1-800-49-PURITY. Keep pressing on.